In the back there, Mr. Oliver, I hear you, sweetheart. Okay, you didn't do it? All right, must have been Charles over there. Turn your cell phones off. Doesn't that sound like tell yourself, turn your cell phones off? And listen, okay. Wisdom Wednesday, tomorrow. Hal Smith from Wild Birds Unlimited is coming, and we've had a lot of bird courses and a lot of bird sections, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. 2:30 to 4 here. Course evaluations are open on the 4th. Is that today? 2 days ago. What year is it? Yeah. Fill those out. There's a, excuse me, a form on the Ollie homepage in the news and announcements where you can do that. Or there's some hard copies out there too. And the Tuskegee day trip is limited to 25, and they're pretty much at that limit. And I don't know if maybe they're taking names and might get another van if there's need for that. You know about the construction, and the course catalogs are going to be coming up on the 25th of March. So, and you know the listings are out for what will be offered next time. I hope you know that. Okay, a couple of things. I'm going to talk about this little guy in a second. But first, I'm going to talk about, some of y'all may not have gotten the email. We're going to show a movie whose name is They Never Grow Old, about World War I. And it's one that you can see in theaters, but you got to catch it. It's not one that's going to show for 2 or 3 weeks. You've seen it, and some other people have seen it. So I've got a sign-up sheet. I sent an email to everybody, and then I thought, well, there were some people who didn't sign up on time that added their names out there, and I don't have your email address. So if you want to sign up, it's going to be Thursday and Friday at 10 o'clock. Thursday or Friday at 10 o'clock. I won't have popcorn, but you can eat there. So actually, if you'd like to bring your lunch, you can do that too. But it's supposed to be really, really good. We've got 2 copies at home and hadn't looked at either one of them. I want to recommend this book. It's called, you said that Sunny Slope? At Sunny Slope, yes, thank you. This book, Dead Wake, is by Eric Larson, who has written several books I've read, In the Garden of the Beast, The Devil in the White City, and then there was another one too. And I like him, but I liked the story. He went into a lot of description of what was going on. I found that the facts he told me coincided with what was on the internet for the most part, and I know the internet never lies, so I'm just assuming that he didn't either. But he does a lot of research before he does this book, so it's called Dead Wake. I think he got his name, the name from the book, because when the ship went down, it was still moving, and in the wake of the ship were dead bodies, parts of the ship, and other gory things. And I'm thinking that's where the title came from. And I want to show you this. This is a scale model, and I'll have it up here on the stage, a scale model of the Lusitania. My grandson made it, and the detail is just really incredible. And I don't have the pictures here that show this detail, so I'll leave it. And he even put the torpedo hole in the exact place. I'm not going to say he's a perfectionist, but everything on here he put on as it should be. And I'm just going to pass along. He's finishing high school this year, and he has a 4-year Air Force ROTC scholarship next year to the University of Georgia. So as much time as he takes with his studies, he took with this for us. I was just thinking it was a lot bigger for some reason, but I do want you to look at it so I can tell him that you all loved it. And I'll give you his email address, and you can write him and tell him too. Yes, dear?
He also built the Titanic and then worked on sinking it exactly like the Titanic sank, and did a video of it. And he's going to take this model when he gets it back, and he's going to go about sinking it in exactly the same way.
The Titanic he built was all of Legos, and you could lift the top off, and the kit came even with little decals of which hall you were in and where the latrines were and where the, you know, where, directions where everything was in the captain's quarters. Nicely done, but it got sunk in the bathtub. Okay, where are we? A Tale of Two Ships. Again, I have to comment, I just think I love these titles. And I know you do too, don't you? Okay, put all these over here. This morning, we're going to talk about two ships. And I know a U-boat is not a ship. So are you Navy people in here? Oh, good, okay. But anyway, I used a little license with A Tale of Two Ships. And I'm going to talk about the two boats, how they met, where they met, and what happened when they met. And we're going to go back in a little history of the navies, because we're talking about the British and the Germans here. The British in 1903 had just gotten a new Sea Lord, Jackie Cooper. That's not it. Jackie, he's a famous guy. Help me here. Jackie Fisher. I mean, he should be Navy. Jackie Fisher, that's a pun. And the Navy had kind of stalled before he moved in, and he had some technology ideas he wanted to put into the Navy, and one of them, besides bigger ships and double hulls, were submarines. Now, my sources tell me that the British Navy had 80 submarines when the war kicked off. Another source said they had 3. So somewhere in between that, and then as I read it too, they weren't like top-notch things. It was like they were still experimenting. So, but they had submarines. Whereas the Germans had tried out their first submarine in 1871, and they built it up at the Kiel harbor and took it out into the water where it, guess what? Sunk. But they tried it, they got it going. And then the technology caught up so that in between the tries, in 1906, they built a submarine that they ended up selling with, now this was the Krupp Enterprises, the 400-year-old German ammunition, artillery, steel company that's been around forever doing this. But they built one that did real well. They sold it to the Russians so they could fight the Japanese. And it was called the Farella, and it's not here yet. So we're going to back up to that one. But they were both in the process of building their navies. So Britain had, I think it was 85 vessels of all kinds when the war started, and supposedly these 80 submarines, whereas the Germans had like 25 or 30 vessels, but more submarines. And by the time the war was over, Germany had 364 submarines either in service or in the process of being built. So they had kind of caught up with the how-tos of the submarines. The importance of the shipping, they needed things. England is a small country, it's northern, it's an island, so they pretty much have to bring in like 60% of their food. They can grow what they grow, but from their colonies all around the world, they have these things that come in to help them survive. Most of their trees had been cut down during the sailing vessel time. They had to bring in huge trees or huge logs from Scandinavia to build their ships and build the inner parts of their ships. So that was kind of an example. And the Germans were short on fertilizer. They had a little food, but then they couldn't grow more because that was a major shortage that they had to have imported. And we've seen through the war, all the countries kind of went hungry. They went through rationing and lessening of food. The Germans, some of them starved because the British were so good at blockading. Both of their missions was to blockade the other one and starve the other one. It's just that Britain had a jump on that. And I read where for Germany, the U-boats could have won the war. And then it turned around that the U-boats were the reason they lost the war, because they had sunk so many ships, merchant ships, not just Marine Navy type defensive ships, but they had sunk so many merchant ships, and they just sunk one too many American ships, and the Americans came into the war. So, like I said, it could be said the Germans could have won the war with their U-boats, but they lost it because of their U-boats. England had kept most of their big ships near their ports. They had spent so much money on them, they didn't really want them out just roaming around looking for U-boats or German ships to sink. So they kept them close to port. And to keep the Germans from invading their ports, they came up with this sling. It was a spider web looking thing that could be hung between like two destroyers. And the U-boat would try to sail through it, may not even know it's there, and get caught up in the webbing. And, you know, I didn't read. My guess is they could either back up out of there, or they had to come up to the top. And what was going to happen to them if they came up to the top? They were either going to be captured or sunk, because, like I said, this could have been strewn between two destroyers, so their time was short. Yes, dear?
The netting would get hung up in the diving planes. They couldn't get rid of it by backing out.
Okay, so that answers. Why didn't you tell me that yesterday? Okay.
Did you discover what the material was? That must have been very...
It was a metal, some kind of steel. Yeah. And when I look at this, I think they put the joints together where they were a little bit wiggleable to capture it. The Germans outsmarted these, though, because what they did is they made faster, stronger, faster torpedoes that would go right through this. And that's kind of part of this story, too. One country's going to do something that works really well for a little while, and the other country's going to do something that works a lot better for a little while, and it's kind of like, stay out of my backyard or I'll go into your backyard kind of thing. But one of the first submarines that was, just put it right down here, one of the first submarines that came along, and we've got you kind of developed so far, but I don't know which one I would rather go into, one of these. This is wooden. It was built by the British in 1620 by a Dutch designer, and he's got a leather drape that would cover the whole thing. He's got it just right here, and the paddles come out. This would pump the air in and out when he wanted to submerge, and you can see that kind of right here. And they would go up to a ship, the British would go up to a German ship and deposit this barrel of explosives near the ship. Then they would get the heck out of the way and hope it would explode. Makes sense to me, right? But that's the Drebel. And it was named after somebody, and it was designed for James I. It's fun to read where, as these wars and battles break out, who's in charge of what, the names, and get them organized. The Turtle was funded by George Washington. He helped a little bit in the design, but he wanted to be able to go up to the British ships in the Revolutionary War and bomb them in the harbor. Maybe that's the wrong term. Destroy them in the harbor. So this little turtle has a screw here that would be screwed into the wooden hull of a British ship, and there's a little explosive right here, and then he would put that in the hull, back off, it would break off, and he would get out of there. And you see he's got the, he's turning here to get his speed, and he's got rudder, and he's got stabilizer. So it never worked. They tried it several times, and it never worked. In fact, evidently the British had one ship in there that had a steel hull, and it didn't do anything. But they've come a long way since those. And here's the Farella, the trout. This was in 1906. They've come a long way. Looks kind of like a spaceship almost, doesn't it? And as we're going to talk about it in a minute, I want you to notice on here, this little section here. This one's not very long. It looks like they've got it on a rail car to transport it, at least for the moment. But the Forella. Now let's talk about the German U-boats. I want you to notice a couple things in this picture. You see the guys standing up there. My guess is maybe 4 feet wide, maybe 5. It's not wide. These little supports, the fences they've got here, when they submerge, they fall down even with the ship walkway here. Okay, I don't know the Navy terms. The little top of the boat there. The deck? Okay, sorry. All righty. And these guys would come out when they could, get a little, it looks like they're just leaving port here. And let's look at it inside. There were 35 guys in this ship, in this boat. And I started laughing. I hope they all got along real well, because they were out in the water for anywhere from 5 days to maybe 10 days, and very cramped quarters. How many of y'all have been on a double-decker bus? Okay, I see a couple of hands, yeah. And I know more of you, some of you fibbing. Thank you, Jim. Imagine 35 people on that, and the sides, it's not even as wide as this, because along the insides of the walls in here, you've got all that machinery that's running from the engines forward, and the battery wires, connections are all on the sides of the ship. It's only like 20 feet across, and it's 23 feet up and down, and you can see the double-decker here where the things were, all the machinery down here, and the people were up here. And the whole thing is 200 to 210 feet long. That's not real big for 35 guys. And I'm wondering, too, if they required a size. You couldn't be too big to be on this, because you take up a lot of room, and that's a lot of room. The berths were up here. They had regular bunks, and the ones that didn't have bunks would have a hammock in there. After touring the U-235 in Chicago, I think that's the correct number, 235, 249, those guys didn't have their own bunks, and I wonder if these guys didn't either. I never read that, but in the World War II submarines, some guy would get out of it, it's his shift time, and somebody would get right in that bunk, and it just gives me the creeps. This was metal. The bunk area was not protected from the outside, so condensation from that metal would come and drop on the guys while they were sleeping. They tried rubber sheeting to put over them. They tried just their rain gear to put over them. But even so, it was still going to sweat inside that, and they said it smelled kind of like a damp cellar. I would think more would be like a gym locker, but it wasn't refreshing to be down there. And let's see what else I want to tell you here. Okay, the ship's batteries and engines sometimes generated foul smells of the diesel, and could explode if they got damp, if they got wet, so care was taken there. And there were some things under here, it doesn't actually identify them, but if those got damp, those could explode and put out gases that were killers. Fewer than half of the U-boats that went out came back. And there were several reasons. One, they were attacked and they were sunk. One was from mistakes inside where they exploded inside from the things that were in there, and others ran aground and had mechanical errors. So that was a pretty dangerous thing they had to live with. Okay, the ship's officers, there were 5 officers, they all had a little bitty, their own private room, which consisted of a bunk and a little place to hang their clothes. The captain didn't even have a place to write his logbook. Had to sit it on his lap or something. So when they wanted to put a torpedo in these forward tubes, they had to move their furniture out somehow to get the room to put the torpedoes from storage into the torpedo tubes. Wasn't a problem moving it back. It's, you know, it's a lot easier than moving furniture. Quality of life aboard the ships. Meals. They had a little galley, and they had a cook, and he would cook there. And they had little paraffin stoves where they could cook on that would stay lit in spite of the wind, that they could use on the deck above. That way they didn't get onion smells that tended to stay and fried things that tended to stay inside the submarine the whole time they were gone. So meals were kind of, they were sufficient, not much else. In fact, yeah, all right. Living space was cramped. I talked about that. There just wasn't much living space. Food shortage, food storage. When they were taking off, when they were departing the harbor, of course the larder was full, and they stored food wherever they could. In amongst the ammunition was the coolest place, so they put the little bit of fresh fruit and the little meat they had was stored with the ammunition section. Even in the latrine, food was stored back there. Every nook and cranny had food in it to keep them sustained for the whole drive. And the whole mission, what they did to supply themselves when they ran out, one time, some plane came over and bombed them. Now I'm going to tell you the story the way it was told, and the questions don't ask me because I've got the same questions. But the bomb missed, so it hit in the water. Well, it stunned all these little fishes that were swimming by. Somehow, they gathered the fish, maybe they made a net of something, gathered up these fish and had a little fish fry. And evidently, that aroma stayed with them in the body of the ship for a while, too. When they would take over a ship, they would occasionally, or they would sometimes, let the ship they were taking over, they would let them evacuate. And once those sailors were gone, they would jump on that boat and bring over whatever supplies, food supplies they had to feed themselves. So that was kind of their food choices. Storage places were limited. We've talked about that one. Oh, and sometimes with the food, sometimes they would even go ashore and send men out hunting to get meat. So there were ways to help their food supply. Drinking water was not a lot. They didn't bathe, they didn't shave, they didn't wash the whole time they were gone. It was awful, awful. And the odors were awful. Okay, they didn't get the wash, and the cooking odor stayed in. And sometimes it was called when you, help me here, when you, somebody's got their first voyage and they have to go through the rituals. Well, sometimes they didn't tell the men that you don't flush unless you are on top of the water or just below the surface. So if these people would do that, there would be this whoosh that would baptize them by, yes, baptize them by fire. So just a little doodad I thought I'd throw in. All righty. And high temperatures. I never read what the temperature got into the World War I subs, but I know in the World War II subs, it was easily at 100. And I would say it was at least 100 down there because they had more opportunity to mix the air in World War II than they did in I. And they went around in their little skivvies. It was just so hot and moist, too, from the water, the vapor coming in. All right, the operations and the dangers. They had to submerge to fire their torpedoes. And that was a secret unto itself. How they did that, I will tell you when I see the picture. All right, now this is the U-20. If conditions were absolutely perfect, they could get that boat under the water in 75 seconds. You will learn that they were never perfect, but that's what they shot for. And on the sides here were, when they wanted to dive, they would open some gunnels under here and the water would come up into the holder. But only so much, because depending on circumstances, how low did they want to submerge was a big question that they had to kind of justify, and justify without computers. It was a weight thing, how much water to let on versus how much weight we've got on the ship. And these little guys, anybody know what these are for? Diving. I'm not asking you. They are diving planes. Talk to you later, baby doll. Oh, okay. Problem solved. Okay, when the ship gets down where the water can come over these, they're turned just like when you see the airplane that goes up and down, they will go up and down too. If it's real rough weather, they can't get a really good hold on it, so they may or may not go down as quickly as they would like, but I'll add that with the whole list of things. When they want to re-emerge, then compressed air blows that water out that they've collected for the weight to take them under. Isn't that interesting? Did y'all ever know how that worked, wonder how that worked? You did? Okay. Y'all are quiet today too. I'm quiet today. All righty. Conditions that affect buoyancy. Launching a torpedo could lower the weight of the submarine by 3,000 pounds. That's a heavy torpedo. So, but it was an easy one to figure when they were trying to figure out what was going to keep them from getting to the depth that they desired. Food consumption. While it may seem like a small thing, they wanted to figure every little thing out. Plus, say they had a crate of oranges or a box of something. Once they finished that, it went overboard. So that did add to the weight somewhat. Oh, and water temperature variations. Salt water versus fresh water. Salt water, and they have different temperatures, they have different salinity, that's going to make a difference. And even if they're passing an area that's close to the mouth of a river and there's discharge from the river, that temperature and that fresh water is going to make a difference as they figure out how to get to the depth. And salinity, the denser water, and sea conditions, which really I mentioned too. If you want to get this guy to go down and the water's, doing like this, it's not going to be able to grab a hold to get down and push that submarine down. So they have to take all these into consideration when they think, hey, we've got a ship up here, we want a torpedo, we found him. How are we going to get down and how deep to get that ship? And bad weather really would be churning up of the waves that they're trying to control with their wings. Oh, yeah. They didn't have much protection when they were above water. They had one gun that they would leave with 250 rounds for, and it was okay, but against a great big ship, it wasn't worth. It was better to submerge, but it was there because it was there and it was useful. I don't want to say it wasn't, but not against some of these great big British ships. And the depth charges, all righty. Initially, and you've seen pictures of those, the oil cans that were filled with some explosives, partly TNT and some other things. that were set to go off at a particular depth. So they would roll these off the back of the ship and hope they got the guys. And they did get a good many of them. But some of the others, it worked out really well. It just was close enough where it loosened the bolts and the submarine started leaking a little bit, so they had to surface. At that point, they were almost like sitting ducks. So they didn't want that to happen too, either. And they, as depth charges got more sophisticated, instead of rolling them just off the back, they would have men on either side of the ship to roll them off, the British ships. They could throw them off the sides. So now they've got the two coming off the back and then one on either side, throwing them over like 100 yards. So as you look at a picture of it, you've got 4 depth charges going off in a row behind this boat. And most likely, that's going to really make a difference in who wins that little battle. And communications, they had wireless. They could easily be intercepted. So they did oftentimes, like the U-20, the boat we'll talk about, it kept radio silence most of the time. When a U-boat captain got 75 miles out from the base, he was on his own. He could do what he wanted to. He could attack a ship or not. He could attack this ship and not that ship. He had left port with, I read 6 or 7 torpedoes. I think they had 6 in the front and 1 that they've shot at the rear, but 6 or 7 torpedoes. And some that they wanted to come home with, too, for their route home. But the communications was cut off when they left port, and then when he wanted to kind of get back close and tell them, hey, we're on the way in. But they didn't want to be intercepted with their position by the bad guys or the other guys. Rules of engagement. All righty. Take you a second there to read. In 1907, the European countries got together at The Hague, and they decided they wanted to, they didn't want savage fighting. They wanted it to be gentlemanly, something that you can't use in a real estate ad now. But they wanted it to be above board, nothing just awful occurring and everything nice as war can be. So they came up with some things to do to prevent suffering, fundamental rights of the people, and ultimately restore peace. And what they came up with, formal declarations of war, prisoner exchanges, which happened from time to time. Sometimes there were many prisoners exchanged. Sometimes there were no prisoners exchanged. In fact, I think the Russians in World War I, none of their prisoners were exchanged the whole time. So if they got caught in the first year, they were there till it was over. Protection as much as they could of the non-combatants, the kids, people that didn't have a dog in that fight, and third parties. Now, did this work? No. It's kind of like, and I hate to use this comparison, but I will. It's kind of like Congress. They meet and they have this big meeting for weeks and weeks and weeks and months, years on end, and we pay them all this money, but they don't do anything. So all these guys met in The Hague from all over Europe, and they talked about all this stuff, and it was going to be great, and it'll help this and it'll help that. And then they went back home and talked about it, but nobody ever came back to ratify it. So it's just a piece of paper with some suggestions on it. And they tried to follow this, quote, gentleman's agreement as much as they could until things got out of hand, and one side pushed a little bit and the other side pushed a little bit, and before long, there was just kind of no holds barred. The British came up with Q ships, named for Queenstown, where they were made in Ireland, and it was not a new idea at all. They were tired of the Germans. They came up with this because of the Germans. They were tired of the Germans just shooting their boats, just shooting them, and whether they were merchant ships, whether whatever kinds, you know, they'd get fishing boats. You don't shoot my boats because we're going to come back and find something that we can get you. And I think it was in 1915, the British only sunk like 6 U-boats. But everything got so different maybe, and in 16 and 17 they had sunk 20 or 30 of the U-boats. So that's what happened with some tactics change. The U-boats had shot up so many boats, they thought, well, we're going to bring in the Q-ships. Well, Q-ships were boats that were very lightweight, so that even if a torpedo hit them, they would still stay floating. It was balsa wood that they were made of, and cork that these were constructed from principally. And it looks like what, a merchant ship? He's carrying something over to London or to Liverpool or somewhere over there, and some U-boat comes along and says, okay, I will sink that ship and I'll take credit for having sunk so much tonnage, because that's kind of how they got their efficiency reports. How many tons did you sink? Yes, Peanut Gallery.
Up until this time, the Germans were still servicing the 11th ship now.
I was getting to that. Yeah, I will. Up until this time. Okay, so what the Q ship did, it hid all their armaments. I don't know that you can tell so much on this. Okay, where's the other picture go? Yeah, right in through here. These little helpless-looking things could become big guns very quickly, and that's what they did. And the Germans thought that was unfair. And heretofore, when the Germans came up to this ship, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes they would come up and say, we're here, you can evacuate, you can get on your little lifeboats and go away, and then we'll take over your ship or we'll sink your ship, but we're gentlemanly, we'll let you escape. And some boats, not U-boats because there wasn't room, but some of the other German vessels would take those men and hold them on the ship. But here you see a concealed gun, and then once they just pull these covers back. And they obviously wanted the U-boat to stay above the surface because that's when they could get them. All righty. Germans changed their tactics, and now they would come up to any ship they wanted to and point their little torpedoes at them, not give them any warning, not say, hey, we're here, bang. So whether they had the Hague Conference guidance or not, it didn't hold. Okay, and here's the U-20 in port, and it's leaving out of Emden in this case because it's going to meet up with the other ship on the 1st of April or end of March. I think it was the 29th of March. Their orders were to leave here, stay in this bight area where heretofore they had just kind of been hanging around this immediate area protecting the shores. But now they've got a real mission, and they're going to take it and they're going to get into position over here in Liverpool. They're to come out of here, come around this way, up through the St. George's Sound to the Irish Sea, and right in through here actually. And any ship that comes in, remember they've said now, anybody, we can shoot anybody we want to. Y'all have made us mad, and that's what we've decided. There's no law against it. So they've come around here. Liverpool was a huge port, and there were lots of people from that area on the Lusitania when it comes by. Okay. On the 5th of May, the big event is on the 7th. On the 5th of May, the British find out their wireless calls, that the Earl of Latham has been sunk on the 5th. Later that afternoon, a torpedo missed this ship. And by the way, there was no notice of what was going to happen there. And then the next day, these two ships were sunk. And about that time is when the Admiralty sent a message out to all the boats: beware, there is submarine activity in this area. And you that have been out on a cruise ship, out in the ocean on some kind of boat where you can't see land, this is still a lot of area here. You might know that there's a warning and that they're there. It didn't say if it was one or how many U-boats they suspected. It didn't say much of anything except they're there. So how do you plan against that? Well, they didn't. They did the best they could with what they had at the moment, which was nothing. And I'm going to give you like 5 minutes, and we'll come back and talk about the Lusitania. And the U-220 is now meeting the Lusitania. And what's going to happen? Boom. Is that what I heard? Boom. Okay. How about 5 minutes, and we'll talk about this beautiful ship. Are you front? All right, ladies and gentlemen. Are you awake? Okay, good. I want to talk to you all about the Lusitania. To me, the U-20 wasn't a happy boat, and the Lusitania is a little bit lighter. It's prettier. It's fancier. And as they were loading the passengers on there, May 1st, everybody was happy. And I watched the old films of people coming up to the entry of the place where you signed in or got started, the terminal. The men had on their hats and their scarves and their long coats, and the ladies had on hats and gloves and little high-heel shoes. They were just really fancy. It was just kind of, ooh, to go on this voyage that was only going to be 5 days, and or 6 days, so that they were prepared to show their best. This is a 4-story tall building, a 4-story tall ship. This picture has all 4 of these in action, but in actuality only 3 were working because, well, actually for 2 reasons. For economic reasons, they didn't want to stoke all 4 boilers for the things, and it was only going to, for the turbines, and it was only going to cut them down by like 2 to 3 miles per hour. Their top speed was 29 miles per hour. It was going to cut them down just a hair, and nobody thought anybody would notice anyway. The second reason, the Cunard Lines only hired British citizens. It was a British company. So when they got to New York and got in from New York, they had trouble finding people, so the crew wasn't total. There were plenty of people there for service and what needed doing, but very little excess because all the men had gone to war. So they didn't really even have much to choose from. But the Lusitania was absolutely fancy. The best of everything, the great big wide beautiful winding staircases, the plush furniture, the beautiful tables overlooking the water vistas were just gorgeous. Everything was A+. It was fast. It was really fast. So they just thought, well, you know, we're good. We're not going to have any problems. We'll get there. We'll do what we're supposed to get there, zigzag. Everything's going to be just absolutely fine. And it was safe. Well, it was. It was. Just kind of like the Titanic was safe, except for, but no, this was a safe ship. They had the watertight fixings. They had lifeboats for everybody, and they had life jackets for everybody. What could go wrong? Well, let me tell you. They brought everybody out. They brought everybody out on to the walkway there by the lifeboats, and they showed them their life jackets. Everybody had a life jacket, which they kept in their, thank you, stateroom. That's a factor too. The lifeboats, they showed them the lifeboats, showed them how it worked, but they didn't go through any lifeboat drills. Showing them was plenty because they weren't going to need those lifeboats. And you know the lifeboats are, and we have a picture here, they're two ropes that have to go down at the same time. You get the people in, two ropes that have to go to the same time, and if this one goes first, people are going to get dumped out. If this one goes this way, the people are going to get dumped out. And what happened, these trained people who knew how to get people in the lifeboats and down safely were in the hold getting baggage ready to be taken ashore when they got there. And guess where the torpedo hit? In that hold. They were no more. So people would try to get in the lifeboats and would jump, they would miss, and oh boy, okay. When the torpedo hit, it hit below the line, the water line, so water was coming in. The lifeboats, oh boy, okay. Am I getting ahead? I didn't get to rehearse this like I wanted to, so I guess I'll wait. It was supposedly safe if this, that, and the other. If, okay. Now let's look at our international travelers here. You can see they were from everywhere. 35 of them, the Americans lived. And some of these people, while they may have been from New York, but like some of the Mexicans and some South Americans, had probably already traveled to New York. And guess who else was there? Gary, tell us a little bit about Frank Houston.
I looked him up in the 1911 census for Ireland, or actually County Antrim, now Northern Ireland. He was listed as a boarder with a Margaret Davidson, age 74. He was 22 years old at that time. He was drowned. His body was never found. I can't find any more on him. I have ancestry, but I don't have British records on him. They gave me that first one, but it wouldn't give me anything else.
Yeah, he had a British-Irish passport. This is
British-Irish passport, yeah. He was from son of Mr. and Mrs. Houston of Fernbrook Cottage, Harmony Road, Belfast. And there is a book called Lusitania, an Irish tragedy, that may have some more information about it.
Thank you. This is Gary Ford. He's new to Ollie from Lafayette.
Yeah, I live in Chambers County.
Chambers County, okay. And I love having people like that because they take what they get here and expand on it. It just is really great. Thank you, Gary.
Sure.
But Frank Houston from Auburn, Alabama was on that boat. All right.
I couldn't find him he's not, of course, he was here between the census, but perhaps he wanted to do this. A lot of newspapers did stories about people in the various, locales of their area. So if perhaps the Columbus paper or the Montgomery paper or that time period may have some information.
Okay. Well, that would make sense. The local papers, if your person had gone down, they want to know who it was, and of course maybe word of mouth would take care of that too, but yeah, to have it printed. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Gary. Come back again, I'll pay you. And there were 3 German stowaways who I'm sure didn't get off ship because they were down in the bottom of the brig and wasn't anybody thinking about letting them off. So, this little thing came out the 22nd of April saying, beware. If you travel on a British ship with flying the flag of Great Britain, we just might get you. Travel at your own risk. Take a guess at how many of the passengers that saw this canceled their reservations. 2. Okay, 2. So I thought, oh man, I'm not sure if I wouldn't have thought about it at least anyway. And the canard response. The truth is that the Lusitania is the safest boat on the sea. She is too fast for any submarine. No German war vessel can get her or near her. Sort of. Except this one instant. This one instant. Okay. On May the 6th, they sailed into the war zone. It happened on when? When did they meet? May the 7th, thank you. They had received that warning I told you a minute ago that was sent out by the Admiralty that a submarine was in the area. But remember, the Lusitania is too fast. He's supposed to be going in a zigzag form so that U-boat can't get into position to fire on him. Well, that's almost what happened. When they got into close to making that turn to go up into Liverpool, they were usually, ships were often, I won't say usually, were often given an escort. But this time they weren't given an escort, and they don't know why. There were thoughts that the Lusitania was too fast, and the U-boat couldn't get in position to shoot it. They thought that it's a passenger liner, and nobody ever would shoot just at a passenger liner. So that, and then the third thing was, rumor or not, that Churchill, who was in France at the time, who was in Paris at the time, said, well, we just won't send them an escort, and if anything happens to them, maybe the Americans will get into the war. Rumor or not, I don't know. But they had no naval escort. So as they were sailing in, that all morning there had been a deep fog, and it finally got a little bit intermittent, finally wore off a little bit, and because of the fog, he had to reduce his speed. He had a foghorn going in case there were some smaller ships in front of him he couldn't see, and he posted 4 watches instead of 2. He did all the things safely for the passengers, but he couldn't go fast. And on May 7th, after leaving the fog, he changed his course. Remember that, because that's a big deal. When the fog lifted, he saw the land, which was still way off in the distance, but he kind of headed towards that land, which meant he jigged or he'd or hawed in another direction. He changed his angle of the ship. At that same time, the U-20 was looking out of the captain was looking out of the periscope, saw the ship and said, I'm not fast enough, I'm not at an angle where we could shoot a torpedo, let's pack up and go home. And the words came out of his mouth, and as he was still looking, Captain Turner changed his ship. And Capitan Schweiger said, ahoy, can you believe this? Get the torpedoes ready. Okay, they had been low on fuel, they were low on torpedoes, they had wanted to go home, but they couldn't turn this down. They saw it, they submerged, and he identified, he knew what he was shooting at, but he wanted that tonnage, whether it was merchants or not, he wanted to win. And it changed courses, and the two of them met, so to speak. He only fired 1 torpedo, and he was looking out of his periscope when he watched it. He saw it coming. There was a Captain Morton standing on the side of the Lusitania with several other passengers, Seaman Morton, whatever I said, was looking out over the water, and he saw the little bubble of the trail of the torpedo coming, and he grabbed a megaphone and said, "There is a torpedo," in his best British. Well, by the time he said that, it was too late to do anything. So 10 feet below the bow line at 2:10, it sank in 18 minutes, this huge ship. And why? It cut a hole in the ship the size of a small house. The ship was still moving, so water was pouring in at like 20 tons a minute. Water was pouring into that ship. And there was a second explosion. Some people say there were armaments on board. If you remember the lesson we had about spies, Black Tom Island in New Jersey was kind of the storehouse for all munitions that were to go on over to the war sites, the battlefields. And it could have been very easily done to have some of those munitions transferred to the hold of the Lusitania. But it seems that the most probable cause was when the torpedo hit, that 350 pounds of explosives hit. They created with the, those boilers and all this stuff in there, a 9,000 degree temperature right there. When that happened, everything went up in the air, everything above it went up in the air. Steel, strings, people, rope, whatever was out there, and you know it had to come back down again. And it was just, it made sense that since those boilers were there, that would have been the cause of that second explosion. It was so powerful that they felt it in the U-boat. Yes, dear?
Sue, are you going to address that anymore? Because I was going to tell you, the British denied it. There were any ammunition in there, but they admitted in 1983 they were carrying ammunition, and that's what they brought up. I didn't know if you were going to address that.
No, I did not know that. I knew they had said it wasn't. Oh, wow, okay. So it was the munitions in there.
Some ammunition that they were carrying on the QT.
Oh, wow, okay. Huh, thank you. Yeah, okay, 350 pounds of explosives, watertight, didn't hold, of course. When it hit, it went 15 degrees list. It leaned 15 degrees, which may not be a whole lot, but it was enough to get the portholes that were open into the water. Now, there were 70 portholes open. So you're listening to the side, and you're still moving, and water is going to pour in those portholes, and the portholes on the other side were open, so there was no way that there was nothing to stop that water from pouring in. And it didn't take long till that 15 degrees list turned to 25 degrees, which is, that 10 degrees is major. People scurried down below deck to get their life jackets. The lights were all off because they had been blown dead, and it was dark except for light that might have been coming in some portholes. And the second explosion, no, it wasn't a torpedo, but it was armaments. All right, thank you for that, yeah. And the open portholes were letting in, what did I say, 60 tons of water a minute, which kept it, they were lucky, I think, probably that it stopped at 25 degrees. And the bow was down. Okay, let's talk about lifeboats. The lifeboats on the ship. Okay, this is the surface, this is the deck surface. And the lifeboats would have been hanging by 2 ropes on either side, just onto the ship, okay? It's not down this way, it's not down this way, and it's above. So you kind of got to climb in the lifeboats. However, you've got 2 sides of the boat, and it's listing, it's leaning over. So on one side, now the lifeboat has been moved over here because it's leaning this way. and the boat has gone down, but this has gone down too, but it's swinging out over it. It's held by ropes. It's swinging out over it. So if you tried to jump to it, some people might have made it. Lots didn't. And if you were on the other side of the boat, it has swung inward so that you could get in the lifeboat, but how are you going to get it out to get down to the water? They only loaded 6 lifeboats. They were full, and one of those lifeboats landed on another lifeboat on the way down, or once it got down, because the ship, one lifeboat had gotten in the water, but the ship was still moving, and by the time the other lifeboat got down, it landed on top of them. Some of the lifeboats that were loaded were let down incorrectly, so that they would be going down like this, the front or the back was lower than the front, and they drowned. The lifeboats were meant to be lowered when the boat was not moving. And remember, I told you all the guys that had been trained to put the people in the lifeboats and lower them had been down in the hold. So you had a bunch of guys that would kind of figure the rope out, and everybody's panicked. So it's just a terrible scene. And then the people that are trying to get on the lifeboats are walking on a surface that's tilted. They're not used to that, and it's probably slick. Anyway, just awful. But you see here, too, they've got two decks of portholes, but I know for sure so many of them were open on that top one, too. This life jacket was a brand new life jacket, just had been bought by Kennard, but not tested, and they didn't know how to put it on. I've read that a million times, and I can't figure out. You tie it in the front. I don't know I don't know what the deal was, but it said time after time they found people in the water with their life jackets on incorrectly, and they were always face down, which leads me to believe it's cork. It's this cork in here covered with cloth that maybe, I don't know what the cloth was, but somehow they were tired, and they just went face down and couldn't get back up on their back. But they did have the state-of-the-art, well, probably not after this, but supposedly state-of-the-art life jackets. And here, a painting was the boat bow was going down. People were out in the water. Like I said, the boat was still moving. The debris was coming by them, and as the boat went through the water, all this was being behind them, kind of following them, and just stretched out for a long way of dead bodies, men, women, and children, women in their fur coats that had jumped. Looks like pieces maybe of a support in one of the rooms, one of the social rooms. Can you imagine the panic aboard that ship? And even as the captain of the U-boat saw it, he was watching. He said, "It looks as if the ship will stay afloat only for a very short time. I gave order to dive to 25 meters and leave the area seawards. I couldn't have fired another torpedo into this mass of humans desperately trying to save themselves." There was no point in doing it. And in 18 minutes, they were gone, and the German sub headed home. He had had enough. This poster went up everywhere. There were riots all over Europe. You saw where all the people were from that were on the ship, or many of the people that were on the ship, and their families were horrified. The German stores, which from time to time took a beating in Britain, the little sausage shops and the businesses, they had rocks thrown through the windows. They were broken into. Again, the breakout of nasty to Germans, but they had lost their people unnecessarily. And what happened to Captain Schweiger? All righty. he went on, well, he went back, and he was a hero for a while, and then all the nation's riots and stuff decided, the Admiralty, that, well, he wasn't such a good guy after all. He didn't need to fire that torpedo. But he went on to sink lots more. A four-masted bark is one of those beautiful ships you see that has the sails up, and it's always moving so easily through the water when you know it's probably not. But it would have been a merchant vessel. And he torpedoed a cargo ship, but it was a hospital ship. And everybody on there was killed. He finally ran aground, and they had to abandon the U-20. He radioed out to the bigger German vessels that were in the area. It was on, on the Danish coast, and they couldn't pull him out, so they rescued the crew. And finally, the conning tower was moved into a park in Denmark, and it's still there. You can go see it if you want to. And finally, Captain Schweiger hit a mine, and the whole U-88 crew was killed in that incident. He was posthumously given the Iron Cross because, I was talking about tonnage sunk, he had sunk 190,000 tons of shipping. Okay, and the Lusitania, the message went back to the Admiralty, the Lusitania is sunk. And this was, 20 minutes after a message had gone from the ship to the Admiralty that, hey, we've been hit by a torpedo. Boats to the rescue in the little town of Kinsale and Queenstown. They gathered any kind of thing that would float to go out to this area. It was, like I said, it was kind of close to the land. So fishing boats, pleasure boats, whatever they could find to pick up survivors. And this is the monument built to them in Kinsale. And you can see here the terminal where they went in, and the ship leaving New York, and here's New York skyline. I'd love to see that monument, but I guess I'm a monument person. Okay. Questions? Yes, sir.
What year was the Lusitania sunk?
April of 15.
What year?
1915. 1915. Yes.
So I read that the Winston Churchill was the first lord of the Admiralty, and that the British Navy had located, knew of this submarine in particular in that area. And when they got back, put it to Winston, and Winston said do nothing about sending a message to the Lusitania.
Okay, so Churchill in France got a message that the U-20 was in the area from those 4 he had sunk, and he said do nothing, which means don't send an escort. Now, was the reason because there could be 2 reasons for that. He may or may not have been told that the Lusitania was moving slowly, which it's not supposed to do. It was supposed to be going zigzag, but he was in a shoals area, and it was in fog, so he didn't zigzag. And Churchill may not have known that when he said that. Or again, he may have wanted to let it take its course and see what would happen. Jim?
Sue, that was the main reason that the United States got in, because so many Americans were killed. It took 2 years.
Well, that's part of it. That kind of started it.
Right.
But the U-boats kept sinking American vessels, supply ships, and taking American lives. So that started it, but it took another year to get Wilson and kind of the population behind getting into a war. But yeah, you're right.
I think one of the main things pushed over was the Zimmerman telegraph.
Right, and we've not even mentioned the Zimmerman telegraph. Gosh, if I can remember, the Germans sent a telegraph to Mexico saying the Mexicans need to attack the southeast part, am I right? The southeast part of the United States, and that came out.
They said they were coming to war
Okay, so if you didn't hear Gary, the Germans promised the Mexicans if they would come into the war and help, and help defeat America, then the Mexicans would get their Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California border back. Okay, but yeah, you're right. We've not even mentioned that.
Why did you, not just for information, in the time frame or the, I don't know the word now, you talk about all the other submarines, you didn't mention the Hunley.
Hunley was in the Civil War, wasn't it?
I know you were talking about all the other submarines.
Yeah, because I didn't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer. And you know, that's one thing I found teaching this course. There's so much information, and how do you pick 7 topics out of all the things that could be picked? It's like, okay, I'm going to do this topic, and all of a sudden there are 87 things to talk about. And you get one, and there are another 87, and it goes down. One thing feeds into the other, and like the Zimmerman, that's a big deal. But I had seen it, and I thought, just change. So,
Hunley,
yeah, there was.
other people here who have seen it as well. When you
Right.
see it looks like a German U-boat. It's
Oh, wow.
sleek as it can be.
When we were in Charleston, it was on a Sunday or something, and it wasn't open.
Yeah.
So we didn't see it. Okay, questions? Okay, Mikey's going to tell you about periscopes and how they work, or how they should work.
How many of you ever looked through the scope of a hunting rifle? In the scope of a hunting rifle, they have what's called crosshairs. And on the crosshairs, there are little tick marks to the left and the right of the center. And in the vertical line, there's also tick marks. Now, there are also tick marks. Now, when the captain of the submarine looked at the Lusitania, first of all, he was able to ascertain that it was a liner of some sort. Therefore, he knew generally what the height of that liner was, the top of the mast was above the waterline. So, as he looked at it in the reticle of his periscope, he determined how many ticks up that line it went to the top of the mast or the stacks. I don't know which they used in order. By that method, he knew by how many ticks that distance covered in his periscope. He could estimate how far away it is. Next thing he would do is he would move the telescope so that the bow of the ship was at 1 dot. I'm saying if the ship is moving this direction. Bow of the ship on the first periscope on the reticle. And he would begin counting time. And at a certain time, he would say, mark. And they would count the number of reticles the ship passed through during a fixed time period, and they could generally calculate the speed of the ship. That's why they would want to be at right angles to the ship. Because if the ship is at an oblique angle to you, you don't know what that angle is, and it's difficult to figure out what the speed of the ship is. Now, next thing he needs to do is he has a little calculator. That's what he uses to compare a solution. So he says the ship is this far away, moving at this speed. I know how long it takes a torpedo to cover that distance. At what angle on the bow do I have to get in order to fire the torpedo? Next thing he does is he gives the helmsman an angle to steer the submarine. And when it passes through that angle, they fire the torpedo. So hopefully the torpedo and the liner will meet up at the same time. Now, torpedoes usually run about, I think they run more than 10 feet below the surface. And the reason for that is the energy effect of waves can cause a torpedo to do what's called porpoising, going up and down as it passes torpedoes are meant to be fired so that they pass under the rolling energy of waves. Few ships built of such light material, wood usually, that they were above 11 feet. And most of the fast vessels that the British used to counter submarines also did not draw 11 feet. A torpedo would pass underneath these small boats. So it wasn't until later on in the process of warfare that the proximity torpedo was created. That was created so that the torpedo would go along